Hey, welcome to the CFO Tribe, our very own podcast dedicated to helping the tribal members of the CFO tribe connect better with the rest of the world and vice versa, the broader business community to communicate and connect better with the finance professionals. I'm your host, Altansukh Ganbold, CEO of MVP First. With years of experience helping CFOs and chief accounting officers achieve digital transformation, I've seen firsthand how connecting people around technology and people in finance can drive meaningful change. Our goal is to create a common language between finance leaders and the rest of the business community, ensuring everyone can thrive in today's dynamic, always changing environment. Today, we have an incredible guest joining us for our very, very first episode. Mike Baas is with us. And let me tell you, this is a conversation you don't want to miss. Mike has over 30 years of public and private accounting experience with large public companies and small entrepreneurial organizations. He acquired his CPA license in Florida after graduating from University of Florida with bachelor and master degrees in accounting. He has held roles from auditor, controller, CFO, financial systems, product owner, FP&A, and is currently a self-employed business and accounting consultant. He also owns a residential and commercial cleaning company. His success in consulting led him to write his first book called Start Consulting and Fire Your Boss. Ooh, I like it. Not that I hate the bosses, but yeah. Mike has lived in Nashville, just like me, Tennessee, but he lived there for over 15 years with his wife, who is a music executive for a large international talent agency. And their 3 kids, ages 11, 15, and 20. Mike, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Alta. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I really wanted you to be part of this very first episode, and there is a reason for that, but we'll get to that later. First of all, let's start with your journey. You've had a very diverse career path, but my very first question, Mike, is why finance? What was your first role? What did you get attracted to that role?
Sure. So really, it goes back to my mother. So my mother was a controller for many years in various roles. As far as my memory goes, she was with a hotel, and then she started her own accounting business.
Okay.
So that kind of led me into this world. I worked for her when I was in high school, and I even worked for her in the summers after college and during college. So that's really how I landed here. And sometimes that works out, and sometimes it doesn't. But for me, I've enjoyed accounting and the path that I've taken.
Wow. Let me ask you, did you have any other thoughts, like other than accounting or dreams? Maybe, I don't know, sports,
Sure.
music.
That's a big area. Yeah. So, I mean, I played a lot of sports in high school. I was pretty good in a couple sports, but I ended up, because I went to Florida, which was one of the top 5 universities for accounting in the country, too big of a college for me to play sports. And to be honest, I see accounting. You don't see a lot of accountants that are also athletes, just because it's a demanding field. So, I mean, that's some of the background for me that got me into accounting.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to go into things I do today,
Sure.
but
Yeah, we'll get there. Yes.
yeah.
And this time again, I can kind of feel how much you love and have pride in your profession. And this is the feeling I also got when we started first meeting in person 8 years ago. And for those who are listening, you, Mike, you and we used to work for the same company.
Sure.
Up until like my move from Japan to Nashville 8 years ago. But
Right.
here's the story why I wanted you to be my first guest on this show. And this is the story that I have never told you. So we always talk about finance professionals, CFOs, controllers, about titles and professions. But there is a human side to it, right? My human side to it was like when I was in Tokyo, maybe that was year 2013. I was taking my MBA. I was a programmer analyst, looking for the next opportunity. Where should I go? Do I go do business, or what profession should I choose? And because I was taking MBA classes, I took some accounting classes, and the opportunity came to switch over to finance and join the accounting team in Tokyo. Of course, when you join a team, accounting team, you get access to systems. And I think you were at that time in charge of Blackline, an accounting system, and giving access to people. And one of my access requests, early access, was to get access to Blackline. And I remember talking to my manager a couple of times, like, Mike Baas is the guy. What is his email? Let's send an approval request or a request for access. And then it would take like a couple of days. And I would always think like I was a beginner, right, in the finance profession. And you were, I think, at that point, a senior manager of finance systems. And like 3 days passed by, no response. We were talking about, what do we do? Do we need a justification? Does it entail money and so on? And then finally, one line, approved. And at that point, I was like, oh man, as a member of a global, corporation in Tokyo, in the Tokyo small office, I'm like, oh, I want to be like Mike Baas. I want to be like, in charge of those finance systems, a senior manager, and then just say approve, or maybe even sometimes deny. That was 2013, and I never told you this story.
Yeah, I don't remember that story. I remember that, so I was in the consolidations team at the time, but then they knew I had a knack for systems, and they kind of put me in charge of that reconciliation software.
Yeah.
And then I went over and met you in person when I came over to Tokyo to do the training for the software. So that I remember that more because we met face to face.
Yes.
And then years later, you moved to Nashville. And we ended up working together.
Exactly. So. Like fast forward from 2013, I think 3 years as we progressed, right? We just sat next to each other in the same office.
Yep.
Members of the same team, you director as global systems and processes and system access and control, me a newly bred senior manager of global business processes. And not only did we work together for a short period, but we became neighbors. You helped me choose my home. Thank you very much. We still miss that house, in Nashville.
Yeah, we miss you here.
Yeah, we are family friends now. And that is the human side, like, we are humans. Like I'm really excited about technology, and these days I'm really looking for like, what is the latest coming out of Microsoft? What is the latest related to AI, and how can this help financial professionals in the future and so on? But when we think about how do we impact the business, we always think like, hey, CFOs, CAOs, titles, right? And their power and authority. And as in the pamphlet of this show I shared with you, sometimes finance professionals, the CFOs are also looked at as the bad guys, because they always look at what could go wrong, or they are not approving my budget or my expense report, right?
Right.
So let me ask you this, Mike. Of course, you followed your mom's path and learned to do bookkeeping. And sorry, in the early days, it must have been bookkeeping.
Yeah.
In my case, when I first started off as an accountant, it was like, hey, I get to use an ERP system, like create an entry, and that stays forever in that system. And later, the auditors come and say, Alta entered this journal. It was like an exciting moment. But for you, so I guess there is always career progression and so on. What contributed most to your career growth? I know you've grown as to become a CFO of a construction company, if I remember correctly, right? So
sure.
From helping your mother to becoming a CFO, what was the most change contributor?
Yeah, I mean, I think, having a good college degree. So I went to, like I said, a top 5 accounting school, and that doesn't always matter, right?
Yes.
College was free for me. I had a 5-year scholarship. Great.
Nice.
I had great grades and all that.
Oh.
But I worked hard. I picked a field. So my master's degree was in accounting systems. So as we talk a little bit, as you just talked about, I was involved in systems, and I've gone back and forth between accounting and systems, but always been in accounting. But I think what really helped me is I went out of college. I went to one of the big 6 accounting firms. Now it's 4, but hard to get into, but great training. Like you learn more in that, that time, especially the first couple years
Mm,
working for a big accounting firm.
mm,
And we were in a smaller office, so I had small clients, but then I had really big clients as well. I had public companies and even some small mom and pop companies that needed audits. So just the training that they give you, and then the
yeah.
relationships you build. I thought I was pretty smart coming out of college, but when I went and worked for the big accounting firm, man,
Oh,
just the people there are so smart. So I always look back to me that was a jumping start for my career, because
mm,
when I came out of there and started working for other companies, my first real job after that was working for Planet Hollywood, which had just gone public.
yeah.
And so, they took all the people, all the accounting people there that really didn't have the good background, and brought a bunch of people in like me that had really big six accounting experience, and said we want a top notch accounting staff. So that kind of helped me. I think a lot is that, that foundation
Yeah.
of a good degree, and then having a really good job out of college. And
Yeah.
that's not the only path, but I
Yeah.
mean, that's what helped me, I think. Because even as an auditor, they let me, I worked on one of the first automated auditing softwares ever existed I got to go work in a side office down in Sarasota, Florida. And then I got to go work a while in Chicago at our world headquarters. And this was the first time they were moving from the old paper. I started on paper auditing,
Yes.
moving from that to an automated system. So I was doing the testing on that system.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
that was kind of neat. And again, using some of my system skills that I got to use more as I went through my career.
So I'm gonna explain to you later why I asked this question, but it sounds like you spent a lot of time working for the big six, one of the big six firms, and I understand
Only a
usually when
couple of years actually,
okay,
but I didn't like going from client to client. I
okay,
wanted to go to one company and really help do something. So yeah,
oh,
but
but in the
go ahead.
beginning, when you work for that firm, you have
Sure.
to have really like I don't know, spend a lot of time, endless hours, really crunching numbers, correct? Does one have to be
Yes,
prepared
yeah,
for that
and
kind of
and
yeah?
and studying for the CPA exam, right? So they
Oh,
expect you to pass the CPA exam, within your first year, which I did. But
okay,
so you're studying, you're
yes.
learning a new job. It's your first real job, though I had worked in accounting before, but auditing is completely different.
Okay. And
But
then you also are a people person. You learn from your superiors and other colleagues, right? While you're doing that,
I
not
try
just
to,
looking.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I try to for sure.
Mm, mm.
If you don't think you can always learn, then you're missing out, I
So,
think.
like for those who are not in the accounting profession, like if we look at the normal, I don't know, job of an accountant, right? In the beginning, how much? What's the proportion like? Are you pretty much 90% just looking at spreadsheets and putting together the numbers, making sure the balances are meeting, or like 50-50 talking to people? Because the reason I ask is one of the reasons I joined the accounting team back in Tokyo was there was this, I was supporting a purchase requisition system developing on the IT side. And
Uh-huh.
when the time was to ask the accounting team to start UAT, there was nobody there. Somebody already left the job. And then I looked at the other side, and the finance manager said, Alta, why don't you come over and help us with all these system implementations? Then when I observed them, they had this thing in Japan called, there is the thing in finance department where they look at whether or not there is smooth communication. In Japanese, there is an expression of like, if the wind blows smoothly, basically one
Okay.
person has no issues talking openly to the other person, to their superior, or vice versa, right? So you do something, you always get a peer review, you create an entry, you get an approval or rejection. You always have like this team effort, right? So I really like that part, as opposed to like being a program analyst in the past, right? I would go to the clients, collect the requirements, and spend days looking at the computer and trying to come up with code and so on. But the finance profession seemed to be different to me in that sense, that you always would try to do a team effort, right? You're never I don't know, a solo player in that sense. What would
Right. I
be
mean,
your take in that?
yeah, it depends on how big the company is, but
Yeah.
for, where we worked, if I think about, you sent me some of the questions ahead of time. So as I
Yeah.
was thinking about it, to be successful, and believe me, I've worked very hard not to be so introverted, and I am still relatively introverted compared to my wife. My
Oh,
wife, she can go and talk to anybody, but she's a salesperson.
yeah.
That's what she does.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, back to your original question, how much time is it? It's a lot of crunching the numbers and just learning the technical side of it. It's
Mm-hmm.
as you grow and become a manager and
Mm-hmm.
you expand your area into other parts of the business is where you get your softer skills of talking to people.
Okay.
But you can get those folks at multiple areas of accounting that's all they can deal with is
Mm-hmm.
putting numbers in boxes and
Yeah.
and doing the work. And that's what I always tell my kids that I do when they ask me what I'm working on. I said I'm just putting numbers in boxes, which obviously that varies now. As a consultant, I do
Yes.
different things, but some days that's what I'm doing.
Mm.
So I think you start out. I think it's really important to start out technically strong, but you
Mm-hmm.
have to move up and
Yeah.
expand. You have to move beyond your comfort levels, and it's the same for any career, right?
Yeah.
But you have to learn other parts of the business, and that's what I did when my first job is as soon as I got bored, I just asked for more work, and I got
Oh.
promoted really quickly at that company, at Planet Hollywood. So because I just kept asking for more work. Now I was single and young and had no kids and all
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
there's no kind of work life balance there, but that was okay when you're young and I've managed people like that were very especially at Asurion,
Okay.
that were very driven and they didn't
Mm.
have kids and all that, and they were willing to work and they wanted to move up. And so you give them more work, but you give them expanded work, like
Yeah.
let them touch other areas.
It's interesting, and I'm going to use this opportunity since you brought this up, right? So, can you bring an example, like real life scenario? So, how do you ask actually for work, and how do you justify? How do you explain it? Just because I'm outside of the U.S., right? So it's just 8 years, and I've been in your interactions and so on. So, for someone who is new to this profession, right? What's the best approach? What do I say to my superior?
I mean, first of all, you have to be getting all your work done, right? So
Yes.
you're getting your stuff done. You say,
Yes.
hey, I know I need, or you ask, you put it in a present. What do I need to do to get to the next level? And
Okay.
and you could put it on the manager. It's
Yes.
nice to give examples, or if you
Mm-hmm.
have specific things you want to learn how to do, you ask for those. But
Yeah.
you make sure you're doing a good job at your current tasks, and
Yes.
then whenever you're having your one-on-one meetings with your manager, you say, hey, how can I advance, or how can I learn more to make me more valuable to the company,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what companies are looking for. So
Mm.
that's what I did, at multiple jobs. Now, the problem is sometimes you can end up working more
Uh-huh.
jobs and more
Mm-hmm.
tasks and not
Yeah.
getting more money and not get, so you have to kind of balance it
Yes.
and somehow, set targets and, what makes me successful, what sets me up for the next level, things like that.
Yeah.
You just can't ask for promotions and you can't ask for more money.
Sure.
You have to make yourself more valuable.
I mean, I catch myself saying sure, but probably more money and more position is probably what everybody has in mind. But anyway, how do you align? Like, it sounds like we at every now and then we have this gap between our personal growth and professional growth, and the business growth. Is there a magic way to kind of try to align it, or is it a timing issue?
Is it aligning your goals with the company goals? Is that,
Yes.
yeah? So it's tricky. It really comes back. I mean, obviously you have to be a goal setter. There's some people that don't even set their own goals other than
Mm.
they're forced to by the company. But if you don't
Yeah.
have goals to learn some new knowledge or get promoted, even, I mean, it has to be you need to lay it out. And what I do,
Yeah.
what I've done in my career is that I've looked at the company goals. I've looked at my goals, and I literally sit there and I may do it on a spreadsheet. My
Yeah.
wife makes fun of me. I do everything in a spreadsheet. We're planning a trip. I do
Mm-hmm.
it in a spreadsheet. But I'll put them all on there and say, well, what's the higher value goals to the company? What are the higher values, and where can I line them up? Sometimes they're not going to line up, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna, obviously I'm gonna try to meet the goals, but selfishly, I'm going to focus on the goals that align more with my bigger career goals, right?
Okay.
So I don't know
Mm.
if I can give you specifics, but if there's,
Yeah.
I want to
Go,
get
go ahead.
promoted,
Of
and
course.
here's a project that is a goal, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
or even it could be, we need to get this much profitability. What am I involved in that will help me get promoted and meet that profitability? You literally have to sit it down there.
Yeah.
And then I always have my goals. If I didn't have them sitting on my desk somewhere, I
Yeah.
had them somewhere where I could see them,
Mm-hmm.
and the company goals. I mean, I definitely had the company goals out sitting somewhere.
Yeah.
My personal goals may have been more private, but
Yeah.
I made sure I was reviewing them on some cadence every month or something, because, you know, just like anything, if you're not working towards something, you're just going to
Yes.
drift off into nowhere. Right? You're not going to get anywhere.
Was that something that you had from the get-go, like learn from your mother? Or where did you
No,
get,
I
get
think
mm?
I read a lot, and I'll say I've probably read 2% of
Oh,
fiction and 98% of nonfiction. So
okay.
I'm always reading, I don't want to say self-help, but it's a lot of
Yes.
self-help. It's, career, how to be more efficient, the
Yes.
4 Hour Work Week, which
Yeah.
is, people laugh at that book, but it's
No.
probably one of the best-selling books of,
Yes.
not of all time, but it gives you the idea how to be more efficient on things. And,
Yeah.
and there's a bunch of books like that, and, all the old classic books. But no, I mean, I wasn't a good goal setter, but I'm a big believer in vision boards. I
Yeah.
have I have a vision board in my closet when I'm getting ready, and then I have little snapshots around the
Yeah.
house of various things. So, and then I have my goals for my businesses and
Yeah.
my personal life and my financial life that I sit down with my wife and talk about.
That's amazing that you read up so much. I mean, that's one other thing I also have great respect in you. Like every time we used to go to the same, business meetings, you sounded completely different. You were prepared and you had like the structure in mind and you'd really be the leader in the room. Especially for us folks who are more like technology oriented. We're talking to you about functions and functionalities and buttons and checkboxes, and you are like, I don't have time for this, or I do have time for this.
Well, I mean,
That's
that's a good point. I mean, back it's again, you're a consultant and I'm a consultant.
yes,
One of the things that's really helped me is my systems background, right?
yeah,
I can do accounting all day,
yes,
but having the systems knowledge, and then being able to talk, because I've always worked with system people. So,
yes,
you know, the IT folks speak a little bit different language. I
yes.
obviously speak a different language. I can speak both, and that's
Mm-hmm.
been very helpful in my career. Where I've, whether I'm sitting really in a finance role or really in a like an accounting systems role, I'm always doing projects. I've always been on jobs where I've been on
Yeah.
projects
Mm.
where I'm helping drive the project to make the company better, to implement some software.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
That's where you and I left off at
And I'm really happy you touched that. Like I thought,
yeah.
and maybe this is one of the reasons that we work well together. Is I thought also I do think that finance people speak a certain language, and then IT people speak a slightly different language, and it's sometimes hard to you know
Sure.
find a common ground, I would say. I mean, I personally speak 5 languages and have an extensive
That's a
interpreting
different. Yeah, that's a different.
interpreting kind of a
Sure.
skill set. But I didn't realize when I came over to the US that actually even using the same English language, there is some level of and interpretation needed always between people, so that people listen, pay attention, and also make themselves heard and so on. So that's great. That's great. So let me ask you back to the topic or the title of this show is really the CFO tribe, right? So I'm going to ask you, like, how did you become a CFO? Is there a story behind that? Did you just,
Yeah, I mean, so I worked for, like I said, Planet Hollywood. When I left Planet Hollywood, I was the acting corporate controller
okay.
of a public company, which I
Mm-hmm.
was, I was in my late 20s then.
Oh,
So I was pretty young. And I reported directly to the CFO and dealt with the CEO,
mm-hmm.
who was quite a character. And then I moved to other bigger companies, because that company wasn't that big. It was,
Mm-hmm.
I think we maxed out at 500 million revenue.
Okay.
And so then I stepped back, right? Because bigger companies, you're not a higher role. But I'll kind of jump to when I moved to Chicago for a couple of years to work for a really large, one of the largest private companies in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Chicago was too cold for me, and so I was the senior manager there. But again, it was a big finance organization for a large food distributor. But then I moved to Nashville.
Okay.
A former colleague of mine
Mm-hmm.
who had moved to Nashville had visited him a few times, and he had a job for me as a controller of a real estate developer. And this is in the early 2000s, about 2006, when the market here in Nashville was really hot in real estate. And I had no real estate experience other than I had real estate investments. So I moved my family down here.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the controller. And then eventually he left. He actually went back over to Asurion. He had worked at Asurion years before.
Okay.
He ended up going back to Asurion, and I became the CFO
Wow.
of this
Mm.
real estate development company, which was owned by two very, very wealthy men that were just basically, this was one of their investments, is buying farmland in Middle Tennessee,
Mm.
which was growing very rapidly, and developing land.
Yeah.
So that was my first real CFO role, and that was an eye opener because we had a lot of bank loans to deal with,
Yeah.
and a lot
Yeah.
of different properties and a lot of different contracts and a lot of companies. So every
Mm.
piece of land we owned was a different company. So I had to kind of manage that. And we were very small, a very small office. So I kind of did a little bit of everything
Oh, okay.
while I was doing that.
So let me. So it's my show, so I'm going to be a little funny here. Some people might think this question is not appropriate, but as a CFO, so you're like in charge of money, right? So how much
Sure.
money are you, dollar amount wise, making decisions on?
Um, Gosh, it was so it was in the millions. I mean, it was several $1 million. I mean, it was a
Mm.
relatively small company
Okay.
because, but one of the owners was a billionaire, and
Okay.
so he would basically get us really favorable terms by going to the different banks and saying,
Okay.
"I'm going to put my money here," and
Mm.
then he'd say, "Okay, Mike, you deal with them, and
Oh,
make sure you're getting the best rate." So, I don't know, Alta,
okay.
millions of dollars for that company as
Mm.
far as just having money. Because if you think of what we were doing, we were building, developing land, very
Okay.
expensive, bringing in doing all the sewers and
Yes. Yes.
roads and all that stuff to build a community. Like
Yeah.
the community that you and I lived in together, we
Mm.
would build something like this. We actually built several in this area, but not this one. So, what I learned the most from that is how very wealthy people think,
Mm-hmm.
because these guys were already super successful, because the guy
Mm-hmm.
that was the president is worth many millions of dollars.
Yes.
And just learning how they think was a great experience for me. Now it all kind of fell apart when the market collapsed in 2008, when we had the whole credit defaults and everything. So they kind of shut the doors and sold everything off, and that's how
Can
I landed at Asurion.
can you
Um,
dig a little bit deeper into that? Like how what's there different about them, those very wealthy people? Like maybe an example, for example.
I think that it's just the way they think, and the way, I didn't have this deal with them, but the deal that the former CFO, who had been successful on his own, they paid him a very low salary, and they asked him to invest in the business. So they want you to, and this is not what they do with every employee, but they expect, if you're gonna benefit from the company, you're gonna have skin in the game. So
Oh,
you know what that means, right, Alta?
okay.
Skin
Mm.
in the game.
Yeah.
You put your money into it. So they would let him invest in properties. I wasn't at a position to do that at that time. So I just had a normal salary and bonus structure. But that's one of the things, is they were very much, you'll earn your keep,
Yeah.
and you can invest with them, but you're not going to make a bunch of money if if you don't put any money into the game with them.
Does that mean that, for example, so it's like a motivation, additional incentive, correct? We're talking about.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, because if they made a bunch of money on a
Yeah.
property and
Mm.
you had invested with them,
Yeah.
you would make a bunch of money with them.
Mm.
But to me, I just made my salary again. I was not in the position at that time to have extra money to invest them with them.
Mhm.
So
Interesting.
but yeah, that's one of the biggest thing I learned is that they really think out of the side of the box. These guys were not your normal corporate people.
Yeah.
They were very successful businessmen
Okay.
that at some point decided to start buying up a bunch of property and developing it in Middle Tennessee and made a bunch of money.
So, Mike, let me ask you, what makes a good CFO? And what are some of the common misconceptions about the role, right? Like me asking, like, as a CFO, what's the biggest check you have signed, or what's the biggest amount you said no to, or something like that. But what is the rest of the world not understanding about the CFO, and what, in your opinion, makes a really great CFO?
Sure.
Yeah.
And as you know, I really just have the one CFO job now. I'm the CEO, the CFO, and the janitor of my companies now. So,
Yeah.
but I've worked with a lot of really good CFOs, and so I'm going to take my experience from there. I've worked for a lot of companies. I've consulted now for 5 or 6 different companies, and I've always worked with the CFO at each one, some closer than others. But one thing that I think that makes a good CFO when I see them is they're just not in the numbers.
Yeah.
If you think of a CFO for a fairly larger organization, they may run IT, they may or may not, they may run HR. Obviously, they're going to run FP&A and accounting. And I've seen other things as well under the CFO. But what's I think really important for a CFO is that they know the operations of the business, and they're familiar. Now, they may come from another company, but they should be familiar with the industry, because the CFO is really, your key financial person of the company. So they're one of the CEO's right-hand person that needs to know how the business works. And so, I think that's the biggest thing that I see, is really knowing, obviously they're technically strong. Hopefully they should be if they're the CFO position, but knowing the other parts of the business and being good with people, right? There are people, I've dealt with some CFOs that aren't great with people. They are what a CFO you think of, they're kind of introverted, and that's fine. But it can make it difficult to get things done. I think to your second part of the question is a misconception is, people think that the CFO's role is to tell you not to spend money, right? To stick to your budget and to, you can't do this, you can't do that. But no, a CFO has to be really another person involved in running the business and using the financial resources that the company has to grow the business. While making sure that everything else is taken care of, that the taxes are paid and the people are paid and all that other stuff, but really using the financial assets of the company to grow the business and helping guide all the different teams that they deal with.
Wow, it seems like they cover a lot of ground, right? Like it's a wide spectrum of responsibilities. Whereas, like, when we outsiders think about the CFO, who is most likely gonna reject my project or approve, be the one.
$1 million project.
Yes, exactly. So from our standpoint, we're more like specific project oriented or technology oriented. Or we're like, hey, we want to make sure that this happens and we succeed through this project or something like that. And then we see the CFO as the bottleneck in that. And maybe they're not paying too much attention to this because this is just one small thing on their huge list of priorities.
That's right. So they're juggling different priorities. But from your perspective, the better financial knowledge that you have when you come
Yes.
with that project, right? Because what's my return on investment? You want $2 million, Alta, for this project. How
Yeah.
much is it going to save me, or how
Yeah.
much more is it going to make me? And so I know that's very obvious to some
Of
people,
course.
but you'll see a lot of people will ask for money
Yeah.
for something, but they won't tell you why they need the money really. So
Yeah. Yeah.
typically, like, okay, how's that going to benefit you? You say you need another person, or you need
Yeah.
another 5 people. How is that going to benefit the company? So I think knowing how to put the dollars to those requests is important, and the better you are at that, the more likely the CFO is going to say yes, right? So
Yes.
it's not just ask for money and CFO says no. It's a
Yeah.
kind
I
of a
mean,
negotiation, right? So
I think it sounds like it goes back to your point about like understanding the business, where we are today, where we're going next, and whether or
right.
not that project aligns with the goals, and how to show it to the CFO or other leaders in the organization, right? That seems to be the key. Now, we've discussed about this. So looking back, before, so quickly going to cover why we touched so much about the CFO. After my MBA, I went back to Ashurian and I had this conversation with my CAO of Ashurian Japan Holdings, Yamaguchi-san, if you remember him.
Oh yeah.
And I was kind of for a short 5 months taking a paternity leave, and I was not really sure if I want to go back to corporate, or even if I go, what kind of profession I want to choose. And there was this open question. Yamaguchi-san came to me and said, Alta, you seem to have done IT, you seem to have done finance. So are you on a CFO track or are you on a CIO track? And I could not come up with an answer, right? Because I've done both. I see like one of them alone is never going to be probably my area. So honestly, up until today, I still have this question, unanswered. So that's the reason why I was really excited to pursue this idea of this podcast, talk to CFOs and understand why do you become a CFO. And the next question to you, Mike, is would you advise today the younger professionals to follow your path and try out to become a CFO? Or would you think like, hey, maybe there is a better option. Maybe system side is better. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, it really, I don't know. I
Let's
can
think.
speak to my
Sorry.
path. Yeah, I
Let
can
me
speak
correct
to my
myself. Like
path.
if it
Yeah,
was your son, youngest son, right? And he said
yeah.
like, Dad, should I do systems or should I do finance? What do I do? Just simply.
I
Don't
mean,
take
I would
options.
tell him what does he get more excited about, right?
Mm.
So my oldest son took a lot of finance classes. He was really smart. He went to some of these college camps when he was in middle school and high
Yeah.
school, where they give you a college experience over the summer, and he did the finance stuff. He was really good in math, and
Mm.
same for my younger son. He's really good in math. So um, now they both liked computers, but it was more for playing video games. So I don't
Uh-huh.
know if they would like all the other stuff for IT. And again,
Mm.
I'm biased, right? I was
Yeah.
biased through my mother, and I like both though, right? Because
Yes.
as we've talked about, I do like the system, and so I'm not saying everybody needs to be really good at systems and finance. It has helped me in
Yes.
my career for sure. But I mean, I think it doesn't. It's not all about math,
Mm-hmm.
but it helps because it takes a lot of logic and there is quite a bit of math to it to be in the finance world. But
Yeah.
that's where I lean is if you like math. But IT, you could probably say the same thing. Like I don't know
Yeah.
what folks in IT like
Yeah.
when they're growing up.
Okay.
So that's I speak from that side. I did like both. I was a computer geek as well
Okay.
growing up, even though computers were
Mm.
new when I was a kid. If we weren't, if it was raining, we were inside goofing off with these brand new computers that were just coming out. Otherwise, we were outside playing baseball or basketball or swimming. But
Okay.
in Florida, we could do that, 12 months out of the year. But so
So good. Happy to hear. I mean, no
that's
regrets. You're
my
happy with your
perspective.
profession.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. Great.
It, I could have hated it when I went to college, but when you get to college, you're going to know. You're going to start taking accounting classes because they're
Yes.
they're 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 fairly boring. But to me, they were challenging and interesting. Uh,
Interesting.
yeah,
Okay. So we talk about finance and systems a lot, right? So today, with your extensive background in FP&A as a financial systems product owner, how do you see technology shaping the future of financial management, bookkeeping, accounting, especially with, AI?
yeah. So that's I like that question, and I was thinking about it quite a bit the other day, thinking about what do you define AI? So what I see is we obviously we use a lot more ERPs, a lot more, and one of the things that I've been doing is I go into different companies. Some of my roles have been special projects at these companies, and some
Yes.
have been sitting in like controller or VP of finance roles until they're refilled.
Yep.
But some of the projects that I've worked on is folks just throw these ERPs in, but they don't know how to use them,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't know all the automation tools, which are kind of
Yeah.
like AI tools, right?
Yeah.
So they're not doing recurring entries, or they're not using the system to use any of the reporting and data dumps that it does, or any of the analysis. So I think AI is definitely helpful. I use it occasionally from what I'm doing to
Yeah.
look at things, but I think for doing data analysis, there AI is going to really be helpful to the finance field.
Just for the record, today is June 11th, 2024. So in your day-to-day finance work today, consulting, right, and working on special projects, do you see AI actually taking over or replacing some of the tasks that accountants are doing today?
Sure, taking over everything. No, I don't think so. But just like anything, it's it evolves, right? If,
Yeah.
if you think back, accounting's been around for 500 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's going anywhere, because you got to keep track of everything.
Yeah.
And there's just, I think, to me, it becomes more analysis. I think there's just more analysis you can do. There's more
Yeah.
because in our world there's so many transactions
Yes.
that
Mm-hmm.
it's really, and I see it all the time. We see errors all the time,
Yeah.
that AI could be programmed to check and catch.
Exactly.
So,
Mm-hmm.
so we're starting to see that now. A lot of my clients that I've been on over the last 3 years have been relatively small,
Yeah.
under $1 billion, and so they
Mm-hmm.
don't have the resources to really put into it. But could they? Yeah, you could definitely hire someone like your company, or it's an outside consulting firm,
Yeah.
very agile and smaller firm, to
Yeah.
come and do those things. And that's some
Sure.
of the things that I've done, even with my current client, is, they brought me in for a particular reason, but then they saw that I knew systems, and they had me start looking at their NetSuite product,
Yep.
and I helped them turn on some automation. And so I've built some things for them, with spreadsheets, but
Yeah.
you know, still basic, but a lot of checks on what they were doing, because they were overpaying things
Yeah.
and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I don't think it'll replace everything, but I
Yeah.
think it'll just, if you don't embrace it,
Yeah.
it will be a problem. I think, if for an accountant, and I'm sure they're starting to teach this stuff in college now, is how to use these automation tools.
Okay.
I know a lot of the audit firms do it now. They take a lot of the data from the ERP. They take most of the data from the ERP, and they
Yes.
feed it into these models
Mm-hmm.
to check the transactions, to look for certain things and make sure they all add up.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like AI is one type of automation, and rather than just following the keyword, what I'm hearing is look around. There is already automation capabilities, functionalities in the systems that you're using today. Use them to your maximum is what the common message is. But
Sure.
but in terms of like this fancy modern thing, AI or ChatGPT or Copilot, Microsoft, are you seeing that to be used or like extensively as a great help in day-to-day, data analysis, spreadsheets?
I haven't seen people using it that much, but I think they will. And
Okay.
I know you and I briefly talked about Copilot, and I see your LinkedIn posts about it.
Yes.
I'd like to learn it. I'd like to have time to learn. I'm I told you
Mm-hmm.
I read a
Mm-hmm.
lot of books, and they're not fiction, so I'm always
Yeah.
learning. So that's one of those things. But that I'd like to learn. But we tend to learn based by
Yeah.
necessity, right?
Yeah.
So if I go into a certain client and they're like, Mike, can you figure this out and how to do it better? I probably would start digging into that more. So,
Mm-hmm.
but right
So
now I run two different companies now. So my leisure time to learn that extra stuff is a little bit limited.
yeah. So let's expand on that a little bit, just in a moment of maybe kind of dreaming or fantasy time, right? So to me, not having a CPA, not coming from that, big six, big four background, so I might come out as if have not enough respect in accounting, in all the US gaps and, IFRSs and so on. But as a language person, right, the way I interpret in my head about accounting is it's all about rules and treatments, right? So you have those fixed. So if there is language understanding, right, where does this expense come from? Why did this happen? What is the event? It's all language, right? Humans talking, sharing, like accountants is tasked to create a journal entry. They need to understand what's going on. They're calling to someone and say, what happened, right? What did you do? And so on. And then based on that, they are kind of thinking about the next step and recording the transaction in the books. It's all about humans talking, understanding the events, and then following the rules, right? The commonly accepted standards, right? And creating those journal entries. To me, on a very generic high level, it sounds like totally doable by AI, right? The big large language models, right? If you feed them enough data about all of the treatments and so on. Like if you more specifically, the other day I was talking to one of my colleagues who is a CFO at a manufacturing company, and he was talking about like he's not a CFO, he's more of a CAO, and he partners with his peer is a FP&A lead, right? And both report roll up to the CFO.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going through a change, but he was not happy because not many people understand how many inquiries the accounting team receives, right? They have to always answer questions, why this number, why this expense, when is it going to be approved, and so on. As opposed to the FP&A arm of the business is more about just looking at the spreadsheets, looking at forecasts, and then comparing it with the actuals, and just they're done with their job, right? So I'm even at that level, if you look at the day-to-day duties and responsibilities of an accounting team, I think I see there is potential, for example, maybe most commonly asked, frequently asked questions from the business, right, to the accounting team. Maybe those can be answered by some kind of chatbot in the near future, like what account do you use to process your hotel expense? These kind of questions usually go always to a phone call or a Teams
Right.
chat
Call
to the
late.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 That's where I see it. So specifically there, I see some potential for immediate automation or help from AI, but also long term, I think. What do you think about my crazy thought about like all those accounting treatments and so on? It was AI able to handle?
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's hard and fast rules,
Yeah,
you know what I see, again, my recent experience, I see it, larger companies that I
yeah,
work for that, assuring that they have the bandwidth and the skill and the money to implement more of
mm-hmm.
that. And maybe the return on investment is there.
Yeah.
But for your mid-sized and smaller companies, that's the getting the technology out is
Oh,
hard, right? Because somebody's got to manage it. And
yes.
again, looking at the last several clients I've been on that are relatively small, again, mostly under $1 billion. Maybe there was one that was like 3 billion, but it's hard, right?
Yeah.
It's with running the business. Again, I'm not, I love that stuff, and so I think it's
Yes.
valuable. But I look at, somebody's got to manage all that still, and
Mm, mm, mm.
somebody's got to build it, right? Somebody's got
Yeah.
to feed it. But I think we'll get there. I think
Yeah.
it'll be more plug and play. And yeah, you and I have talked about the
Yes.
chatbots for my other business, which is a simple service business.
Yeah.
But I think those are great ideas.
Yeah.
but my client now is relatively small, and they're buying businesses every month, and it's just a challenge for IT and accounting just to keep things running.
Mm,
You know
mm,
what I'm saying?
mm.
So, I don't know if I'm answering your question very
No,
well.
no.
I love the AI stuff.
Yes.
I use ChatGPT
Mm-hmm.
personally quite a bit,
Mm-hmm.
probably almost every day for
Yes.
various reasons.
Yeah.
But I would like to learn more about it, but yeah, I definitely see we're going there. But I think it's gonna take some time.
You kind of remind me of that situation where I was the IT analyst supporting the development of a new system. And then when the time was to go and ask the users, the finance department to do user acceptance testing, there's no one around. They asked for it.
They don't have
They,
time, right? Yeah, yes.
yes.
No, I get it. You and I've done a lot of projects, and I've been on both sides of that. I've been,
Yeah.
more on the user side, but
Yeah.
I just helped my current client implement a purchase order
Mm-hmm.
system,
So,
using Concur, and it was really hard. We did most of the user acceptance testing. The accountants did.
yeah.
We really had a hard time getting people outside of the project to help us.
So let me ask you this. So accountants, finance as a whole is interested in systems and improvements and so on in automation, right? Correct?
Um, Interested in systems. You and I are, but I don't think. I mean, do they know them better than we did coming out of school? Probably yes, because
Mm-hmm.
spreadsheets were relatively new when I was in
Yes.
college. But
Mm-hmm.
but it's are they interested in improving? I can't. I don't always see that.
Oh,
It just,
okay.
it depends on the people, but,
Okay.
some people just think, oh, I just need to do my job,
Okay.
and then I use the tools.
Interesting.
That is not my
Of
perspective.
course.
I've
Mm-hmm.
always wanted to do more
Yeah.
and improve things. And again,
Mm-hmm.
hey, I think there's a better system for this. We should implement it, and this is why it's better. But um, it's not always the case, right? But
Mm-hmm. So what is the job of that tribal member of the CFO tribe, right? You are a finance person, accounting or FP&A, no matter what. If you're part of the finance organization of the CFO
yeah.
organization, my definition is you are a tribal member, right? You're a follower. But what is your job? What do you have time for now, as opposed to like thinking of, automating, improving, and getting the processes leaner and so on? That's the perception for people like myself from the outside. But tell me how you see this.
Um, and let me know if I'm not answering the question properly.
Yeah.
But again, the CFO and anyone in finance, their job is to, you know, preserve and track the assets of the company. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the higher up folks like the CFO are looking for ways to use that capital to make things more efficient. So what doing closing the books off and on for 30 years, it's super boring, right? So
Okay.
my thought was always, let's close the books as fast as we can,
Yeah.
and then those other, depending on how many ever days, it could be 5, it could be 10
Mm-hmm.
business days of the month. What can I do to make my job even better? And so that's always been my mindset. But because I'm very comfortable with systems,
Yeah.
because then it gives me an opportunity to do more interesting work and make more improvements. Closing the books is boring. It's old news, right? By the time we close the books, the business continues to move on. But how can we take that closing and give more information to the rest of the business? Well, by making it faster and getting better tools. So having better ERP systems, better reporting systems, better reconciliation systems. So,
Yeah.
and I don't know if I've answered
No, you did
the
actually.
sense
But
of
I'm
it.
gonna I'm gonna turn it around back to you, and it's gonna be a little bit of a interesting point. Is there a love-hate relationship from an accountant's perspective towards systems and automation? For example, I don't need to be doing this repeated work. This can be taken care of by the system, right? So I want automation. But in order to do that, I have to go out, spend more time with IT, dictate, tell them, they come back to me, requirements, documented, approve, review, test, create, everything. There's more work on my plate, so I don't really need that much additional work on my plate, right? That's one way of explaining it. The other way is also like, if I think about automation, and you said reducing, shortening the month-end close cycle, right? Or maybe even the task that I'm spending 2 or 3 days or 2 or 3 weeks today manually on my own, and, to the best of my abilities and diligence, I'm spending so much time and doing this job, performing this task with pride. All of a sudden, if it's going to be taken by the system and automated, do I have to feel threatened as is my job going away? So what's your take on that? Do you feel?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I see people that there's different people out there. So, I think about all the people I've worked with. There are folks out there that they're scared of systems.
Mm-hmm.
And B, they're afraid, well, if I make my job easier, they're going to take it away from me, or they're going to give it to the next person. And that's never been my mindset. My mindset is always, I don't want to keep the same job. I want to do something different. So if I learn something, I automate my job,
and
it goes away, then I go somewhere else, right? If I'm doing a good job, but that's my mindset, but I worked on a project at one company when I lived in Florida. It was my last job when I worked in Florida. And they said, Mike, go around to all the financial analysts around the country, and first of all, make sure they're doing what we expect that they're doing, and basically figure out how we can automate some of their jobs and centralize them. So we had 14 distribution centers. Each distribution center had their own financial analyst. So I basically eliminated a bunch of people's jobs, including my own. So I figured this project out, but then they promoted me and moved me to Chicago. That's a whole other story, which I kind of mentioned earlier.
Yes.
But it happens, and you can't be afraid of that. But is there a lot? Yeah, you hit the nail on the head when you said, "Well, I'm going to have to spend a lot of time to save time in the future." But you see a lot of people that they're like, it just works the way I do it now. Why do I want to add this extra work to my plate to make it easier later? They don't see that benefit, and that's a struggle, I think, with any implementation. Again, I just went through a PO implementation, and it went live April 1st. We're still kind of fighting with people, not fighting, but people are just not using the system, and we're about to implement the kind of the no PO, no pay policy, July 1st, but maybe that's still up for debate as well. But so I know you've been through that process. So there's a lot of people, they're like, this is too hard, and so we're like, no, it's the same as putting an invoice in, but you're just putting the information in first. And so it's a struggle. Change is hard for many people. And you have to sell the benefit, right? That's what we've been trying to do, is sell the benefit with upper management and push it down. And again, you and I have gone through this at many companies and many times. So,
and you brought up a very important or interesting keyword: change, right?
Sure.
Like, I come from Mongolia, and I was raised in a way that we're gonna change, we're gonna bring in change, we're gonna build the future for the country. That was the mentality that we were brought up, and ever since, I always thought, like, I'm gonna be always improving. I'm gonna bring in improvement wherever I go. Things become better, shinier, and so on. But in a corporate environment, especially if you're on the IT side, right? You're a technology guy, you know your systems, but you don't know the business side. I think when you immediately go in and it's like, I'm going to help you change your process. I'm going to improve your work. You're not going to immediately, so to speak, win friends, right? So what would be your advice to give maybe IT consultants who are working on system implementations to approach, and people who kind of are afraid or not really open to change?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where you are in the life cycle of the implementation, but the more you can ask, what's the problem, instead of telling your client, here's the answer, right?
Yeah.
Because you're
Yeah.
coming
Yeah.
from the outside, right?
Yes.
But back to the point I made earlier about the CFO needing to know the operations. I think um, the consultants need to make sure that they understand my business first,
Yes.
and my processes and my pain points.
Mm.
And I know you know that, and I know that's
Yeah.
what you're thinking. You're not saying that you would just come in and tell them, "Here's how I'm going to change your business." You would go
I
in
may
and
have
find out.
thought that. I may have had that thought maybe some
It's
20
it's
years
kind of the
ago,
way you said it, but I know that's not what
Yeah.
you meant. But
Yeah.
but
Mm.
no, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's know my problem and my pain, and then work
Mm.
together to fix it.
Mm.
Again, it has to be the right person or level of management that wants to make the change, right? You can't
Yes.
go
Mm.
to the line level person that doesn't care about, oh, you're going to add 10 minutes to my day. I don't want to talk to you, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Mm.
it's really getting to know the business, and
Okay.
knowing what you're working on and what you're changing. I mean, again, that's what makes you valuable is that you're on the IT side and you have the finance background.
Mm. Mm.
On the other side, on the accounting side, that
Okay.
I've done a lot of IT work, but
So good question. So it's like knowing who you're working for, like from a project sponsorship perspective, and know the problem, know the objective, right? Know the
sure,
pain, find
sure,
the
yeah. I
pain
mean,
point.
yeah, we're speaking really high level, but yeah,
Yeah.
I think that yeah, I
Yeah.
think you got to know what you got to get the buy-in. You have to let the person tell you what's wrong, and
Yeah.
kind of let them lead you through it, and then you help them resolve it.
Yeah. I mean, there will be, of course, situations where the person will say, nothing's wrong, everything's working.
Sure.
Yeah,
Oh,
why you want
sure.
to
Yeah,
change it? Why you
sure.
want to
Yeah.
break? The
Yes.
classic question, right? Why break if it's still working?
Right. Why break? Yeah, it's not broke, don't fix it. Right.
Yeah.
But sometimes they don't know that it's broke. They don't know all the downstream impacts or
Mm.
by the way, we're buying three other businesses, so your volume is going to triple
Yes.
if you don't automate some of these processes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm dealing with that now with this company, is that
Yeah.
they're growing very fast, and
Mm.
so not we, really them, and they've been having me help them. They've been like, what processes aren't scalable, and how can we automate them? And so
Yeah.
that's really what a lot of smaller businesses have to do, especially when they're in hyper growth mode.
And automation and you brought up this word scaling, right? Is not just for the sake of automation or for the sake of scaling or growing the business, right? It's also, I feel, there's this ever increasing shortage resources, right? Skills resources, people,
Sure.
not only on the technology side, but also on the finance side. Are you seeing that also on the CFO tribe side?
I think so, and that's why some of my projects that I've come out, and they were supposed to be 3 months, which I don't care, right?
Mm-hmm.
The longer I'm working, the less
Yeah.
times I switch, it's better for me and better for
Yeah.
the client. Some of the, only two of them have been high level finance positions where they ended up being a long time to
Yeah.
find a new person. But a lot of my other projects have been, including the one I'm on now, which I'm on my 15th month, I think,
Wow.
was, hey, can you come out and help us with this one particular project?
Mm-hmm.
And you know how to do all this other stuff. Okay, here, we don't want to lose you. And I'm literally like another controller there, and that's
Yeah.
what it's been, is
Mm-hmm.
just, it's another controller. They know they can cut me at any time.
Yeah.
But they don't have to pay any benefits. I'm
Yes.
probably a little bit more expensive than what they're paying the controller, but
Mm.
it's another set of hands that can easily pick things up. It's because when you get that other person, sometimes it's hard to slot in. Like, where do you slot in a small organization? Where do you add resource? You need
Yes.
experienced resources,
Yes. Yeah.
but you can't have two controllers. You
Yeah.
could, I
Yeah.
guess, and some bigger companies do it.
Yeah.
One of my clients we had three. I was the head controller, and then I had two controllers under me for each division. And again, I was there for a year. It took them that long to find someone to replace
Yeah.
the outgoing CFO or controller. But,
Right. Yeah. So it
yeah,
sounds like
yeah, to answer your question, yes, I see it all the time that people don't have enough people,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a struggle to say, hey, I need another
Yeah.
person. Like you see, I need
Yeah.
another accountant or another. It's hard, right? It's even though it's in the CFO organization, that they say no because it's people look at accounting's just a cost center, right? It's just a
Yes.
cost.
Mm.
It's just a cost in everyone's mind. So it's a struggle to get enough resources.
It sounds like you're picturing the image that I got from your explanation is like you're a dream consultant for the organization.
I hope so.
Yeah, yeah,
The
that's
consulting firm that I work through likes it because most of my projects have been set for 3 months and they've gone for a year or more.
nice,
This one
nice.
now,
Mm.
so
Yeah, I'm surprised. Yeah,
it's been nice. And this one's been remote, so
and
um,
I'm surprised to hear that you had only 5, 6 clients over the I don't know how many years you are doing
so
consulting
yeah.
now.
So 2021 is when I went when I came out of mini retirement during during COVID,
Yeah.
staying home with the kids while they were
Yes.
at home in school. And then once they went back to school in January of 2021, I went back. But yeah, it's been only a handful of clients because every time I've only had one that was really short, and it was a very specific to help. They needed help getting into
Yes.
an audit. Actually, they were doing three audits,
Yes.
and I came out and helped. And it was somebody that I'd worked with before at a previous company, so he knew me, he knew my experience, and but it was very short. But all the other ones have just taken longer, and it's not that I was slow. It's just they found more stuff for me to do
All right.
because
Yeah.
I had the background with them, and then
I guess you would be the ideal or the dream consultant who would spend only a minute or 10 minutes on a simple thing that would take for an inexperienced person, maybe days or hours. Don't we explain that
that's
way?
it. That's
Yes.
really narrowing it down. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's hard when you bring a consultant in to know how long something's going to take,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But it definitely helps that I have all the accounting background
Yes.
at all the levels, and then
Mm-hmm.
also the systems knowledge, because I've gone into to clients that they didn't realize going in that I had Dynamics 365 experience, and they had just implemented it, and they had so many issues, and so I spent several months helping them clean the
Yes.
issues up, and it just happened to be you and I
Yeah.
were on worldwide implementation together for that, so I knew that
Yes.
software very well. Other softwares I've just figured out. I've had
Mm-hmm.
clients with NetSuite
Yeah.
and other softwares that I haven't used, but they all look the same underneath the covers, right?
Let me ask you. So right now you are a consultant full time, I guess, right? And a
Yes.
business owner yourself. This keyword work-life balance, is this still a priority for you?
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm sure you and I have discussed why I left. When I
Yes.
left Asurion, so
Mm-hmm.
in the intro, you kind of mentioned my wife's role. So my wife's in the music business, and we're here in Music City in Nashville. And
Yeah.
so her job, she doesn't start, and just the industry, she doesn't start till late. So she might not go
Mm.
in until 9 or 10, but
Oh,
most of her days don't end till 6, 7, 8, 9 o'clock
yeah.
because that's just the industry. She goes and sees shows all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you and I started traveling around the world to do these implementations, it
Yes.
just put a big strain on our family. All my
Mm.
my kids were in middle school
Yep.
and elementary school at that time, and so we just and this, but I'll
Yes.
share it with your audience. You and I'd work in the office all day, and then I'd come home and be on calls with I had a team in the Philippines that worked
Yes.
with me, and then I dealt with Japan all the time. We had a huge office in Japan and big business in Japan. Um, and then Europe, which is not nearly as far. So my days would end at 11 o'clock at night. And so
Yeah.
that all of that just, I loved my job, and I know I could have continued to move up quite a bit there, but it just became a strain. So that was a big move for me to move to a US based company
Yeah.
that had a huge office here in Nashville. So that was part of it. And then the consulting. So my last job during
Yeah.
COVID, I was working 70 and 80 hours a week, um, because people started quitting, and we during COVID, they just like left and they put a hiring freeze because our company was in the energy business and we were losing money so fast. So that was kind of the final, one of the final straws for me,
Yes.
because again, here we are again, where I'm not available, even though that job was very close. I
Yeah.
was never available for my family. So
Oh,
that's when I decided to reach out to some of the consulting firms in town and say, can you help me find consulting work? And the rest has kind of been history since then.
yeah.
And I've done consulting before in my career. I've taken time off here and there. It really helps me control my hours. And then, a year ago, I bought another company
Yeah.
that is kind of operated by the company and the manager. Excuse me. And I just do the account. I just do the fun stuff, the
Yeah.
account. I automated a bunch of stuff. It was very manual. And so anyway,
Yeah.
yeah. So yes, it's a bonus now that I've been on this client for 15 months. It's based on the East Coast. And I've been home. So it's been very helpful, right? You don't have any commute time.
Yes.
It's easy for me to get stuff on my lunch break. So
Nice. So
I
you
know
can
that's
control.
kind of
Yeah.
a long-winded answer, but that's kind of where we're at. My wife's been in her company for 28 years,
Yeah.
so she's not leaving.
Okay.
So we have insurance and all that through her. So
Yes.
me the opportunity to
Yes.
do more entrepreneurial stuff, which I really enjoy. That's in my spirit, kind of from my mom.
So doing both consulting and owning a business doesn't really fill up all of your time. You're still kind of really trying to fit it and control your hours.
It does fill up most of my, but as a consultant, most weeks I just work 40 hours. And if I work more, and I definitely have worked some overtime for some of these clients, I get paid more. Right. So I'm not on a salary ever. I'm always on an hourly basis. So, I get my hours in, but then, if they need me more, it's going to cost more. And then I can always say no, right? I can say no. I have never said no, to that more work, but, I honestly like it, but it's a little bit of a challenge with having a second business. But it's not that bad. I enjoy having that extra business.
Okay, which brings us to the next question about growth, right? What is growth for you personally, professionally, or maybe even business-wise? Could be something like maybe you want to buy another business.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah. So, so we're talking about my personal goals, I guess. But growth for me, is my wife's never gonna. I don't think she's ever gonna retire. But I'm trying to convince her. We're both in our early 50s, and so growth for me is to replace the consulting business at some point.
Okay.
So that I'm not consulting. And that means either growing this other business and then I'm always looking at other businesses.
Okay.
So I have a pretty decent flow of businesses that are fed to me and I know where to go find them.
Yes.
So growing the current service business and or buying other businesses again, where I'm only spending a few hours. Eventually some of the stuff that I do, the accounting, all that, I can turn it over to somebody else. But right now I don't care. It only takes me an hour or two a week to do a lot of it. So I don't care to turn it over. But that's my process is to buy more businesses or grow. Get to a certain level of income with only, X amount of hours of management. And then, that's my growth. And again, that's different than a lot of people. I do get offered jobs from some of my clients and I have considered them. But it would have to be just a really, really good situation for me and my family. And again, it can't be a ton of hours. So my wife is at the top, at the top of her company. We love it, right? So we have a lot of perks with her being in the music business.
Yes.
She's a couple phone calls from pretty much anybody, and we can get tickets to almost anything except for Taylor Swift. So people don't ask for Taylor Swift tickets. But anyway, so that's my like being close to my kids, because there was a period of time, especially at Asurian, where I was missing out on a lot of stuff with my kids because of that. The schedule that, you, and I know you were working a lot of those hours as well, because we were global but the US the U.S. wanted all our time, but
Yeah.
then the other folks around, on the other side of the world wanted our time in the evening. So
Yeah.
you,
When I,
you know it as well. And when they
yeah.
say, "Oh, just go home early" in the U.S., it's like
Just a silly
it just
comment on
doesn't.
that,
It just
like
doesn't.
when I moved
Oh,
over
here,
from
hey,
Japan.
there goes Mike and Alta leaving the office at 2 p.m. That which never happened. But
Yeah.
that's basically what was suggested by some people, and it's just like it's not. We won't get all our work done.
Little did I know that the G word in the position, global business process owner, the global keyword here out of the United States meant like
Right.
7 a.m. calls with Europe, with
Sure.
the UK,
Yeah.
and then 7, 8, 9 p.m. calls with Asia, while also being on time in the office, right? Coming in early and then leaving on time. So that was interesting.
Yeah, so I mean,
But
I
we
wish
learned
I
a
was
lot.
better at work-life balance, and I did. I kind of wish I pushed back a little bit more and see if that had worked. I don't know if it would have, because
Yeah.
I do. All my memories of Assuring are very fond. I was there 8 years,
Yes.
and I really enjoyed it there, and was at a good level when I left, and I think I could have continued
Yes.
to move up, but anyway.
Sure. If an ideal situation came, ideal life scenario came true, what would it be?
For
You kind of touched on this, but
Yeah,
anything,
I mean,
ideal life
like a
scenario. Yeah.
work situation, right? Because I talked about what my
Life.
goals are, right? My
Yeah.
goal is to, over the next probably 5 years, replace my consulting where I'm only having to manage the businesses, maybe 10 hours a week. I don't know what the right number is that makes me enough income. And then, while I still have kids in school,
Mm-hmm.
have more time with them. I, my wife and I like to do charitable work. We just don't
Okay.
find time. We like to travel, obviously, but I love
Yes.
coaching sports.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, you coach sports when you have kids in sports, but I could
Yeah.
see myself coaching even if I don't. There's
Mm-hmm.
always a shortage of coaches, around this area because sports are so popular, but people are always too busy to coach, and so that's something that I like to do, and then maybe even I don't know, hold like a local government office, like a city commissioner office or something like
Oh,
that.
okay.
I don't know if I'd have to see what it feels like to have free time. I don't know what that feels like.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean
Okay.
that's my
Okay.
goal, and then again, support my family and my wife with, again, she won't retire, I don't think, for a while.
Sure.
She loves it.
Yes.
We love the perks, but yeah,
Mm.
help. I mean, I already do help out around the house quite a bit more than probably your typical family
Yes.
dynamic, just because I'm here a lot more. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, I guess that's, would I go back to work? Yeah, if it was something that was not superly overtaxing and it was local,
Yes.
I would consider it. And again, I get people reach out to me through LinkedIn or former colleagues, quite a bit still, but
Yeah.
I really enjoy the consulting and some of the flexibility with it.
Yeah. And I recently also liked your post on LinkedIn about the boring business. Was it Brief by Cody
Oh yeah,
Sanchez?
yeah, yeah. She's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she's the one that I started following. I don't know how I found her. That talked about,
Mm.
I bought a cleaning company. That's a boring business. That's what I bought,
Okay.
and I learned that from her, how to do it, and
Mm.
just absorbing all her free content. I looked at
Wow.
joining her
Mastermind
mastermind,
or
and it
yeah.
was a lot of money, and I
Mm.
basically took that money instead and used it as basically a down payment on this business. So
Wow.
again, I have an entrepreneurial spirit. I wouldn't say just go out and buy a business. I know a little bit about
Mm.
law, and I know a lot about numbers, and then I,
Yes.
I could tell that there was a lot of automation that could happen with the company. So anyway,
Mm.
that's what I look at. I look at stuff like that.
Yeah.
It was a retiring person that, and I bought a bunch of cash flow basically. Yeah,
Yeah. And
I highly recommend people to follow her if they're interested in
it's an
buying a
interesting
business.
small, yeah. I mean, Cody Sanchez boring business brief is another kind of evidence or proof to me that this world is a very small world.
Right.
Because I did not hear about her before your post, and then I started following her. I subscribed and kind of every now and then skim through her newsletter. Just to realize the other day that my next door neighbor actually was kind of featured in,
Oh, wow.
in that business brief.
Yeah.
We had a neighbor who started his own garbage or trash company. And then that was kind of a very interesting success story.
Boring
We know
business
that
for
because,
sure.
but we can tell more about that. But
Sure.
that's, all those things that are out there online, it's not always just made up, but it's really coming also from real life,
Sure.
Thank you for sharing, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, I think a couple takeaways, again, going through your questions is, for the CFO people and just anybody that's in finance is learn, as quick as you can, learn other parts of the business and learn IT. I mean, learn, I coming from a systems background a little bit, with my master's degree, anytime there was a systems project, I always volunteered for it. Right. I get like, we need somebody to represent us on this, project for accounting. Who wants to do it? I always did that. And yes, it's more work, but it expands your playbook, your toolbox of skills. And really learn about, what's going on with the project and again, learn other areas of the business. If you want to move up, you have to understand how all the parts work together. And for people that don't know, Assurian is they do the cell phone insurance for most of the large companies around the world. It's a very complicated business model. And one of the struggles that people always had is explaining how do we make money, and we make money so many different ways. But it took, you could sit there in your one little area and not understand it, and you wouldn't move up because it's pretty complicated business.
And it's also a huge organization.
Sure.
Right?
Yes. A global organization that is a little bit different in each country. But anyway, that's, if you get to a bigger company, if you get to a smaller company, you should know everything, right? You should be able to learn everything because there's not many people. But I mean, that's for me, a big takeaway from, if you're not in finance, learn finance. If you are in finance, learn the other areas of the business, because especially with technology, it's taking over, right? So
yes. Thank you so much, Mike. Thanks for joining today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, your insights are very helpful for both finance folks and also consultants like myself and people who are advising and navigating through transformation and change. I'm sure whoever listens to this podcast will have a lot to learn from you.
And from you.
That was it. That was our very first episode of the CFO Tribe podcast. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to the first episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a review.